So howdy, folks. Welcome to Cattle Trails Showcase. I'm Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate. Glad to be your host. Today, we welcome members and guests of the International Chisholm Trail Association who are participating live. We also give a howdy out to all of you who are watching this on YouTube after the fact. We appreciate you joining us. This is our second Cattle Trails Showcase. Those of you who were on last month may recall that we had pictures on the screen and the Brady Bunch boxes, if you know what I mean. Our technology folks have advised us not to do that this time, so we have everyone muted and we're not seeing your pictures. But we do have one request right out of the chute here. At the bottom of your screen, there is a chat icon, should be a little chat word balloon icon right in the middle of the bottom of your screen. And we'd like you to use that. We'd like you to go to the chat field and type in your name, your town, and your favorite cowboy TV or movie star. So we'd like you to enter in the chat your name, the town you're in, and your favorite cowboy movie or television star. So it could be, you know, anybody from Roy Rogers to John Wayne, but we encourage you to put that in the chat and go ahead and enter those in the chat as we go forward. And we'll also be asking you to use the chat to enter questions for our speaker later. Today we are zooming down the trail to San Antonio, Texas, and we're going to visit a very special facility. And let me make one more quick check to see if Michael is on. And I am not seeing him. Michael Grauer is Vice President of the International Chisholm Trail Association and President of the Western Cattle Trail Association. Dennis Katzenmeyer is President of the International Chisholm Trail Association. He's on today along with other officers, Secretary Nancy Lawrence and Treasurer Mary Lou Rivers, among others. But our speaker today is Bruce Shackelford, and he is the Texas History Curator of the Witte Museum in San Antonio, Texas. I'm told he also appears on the is it Antiques Roadshow television show? So maybe we'll have to hear about that. I know that Michael could tell us a lot more. Without any further ado, let's welcome Bruce Shackelford from the Witte Museum. Bruce.
I want to thank you all for having me, Ron. This is what I love to do, and I grew up doing all this, and you know, miss not being out there. And I also want to point out that Catherine Nelson Hall is the Texas Heritage Curator at the Witte Museum, and she's also my wife, and she's joined us for this, and you'll find out why as I go through this. And I'm gonna share my video and going to show you guys some pictures, or I'm gonna share the screen here, and let me see if I can get this up here.
There, it's on screen, and there it is.
There you go. The Witte Museum is probably the oldest history museum in Texas. There is one museum that's older. I believe it was an art museum that was opened in Fort Worth in the late 1800s. We were founded in 1926, and our charge as the Witte Museum is where nature, science, and culture meet through the lens of Texas' deep time and themes of land, water, and sky. We're located on the banks of the San Antonio River in Breckenridge Park. The Witte Museum is San Antonio's premier museum, promoting lifelong learning through innovative exhibitions, programs, and collections in natural history, science, and South Texas heritage. This has been amended. It is Texas heritage. people in England have a hard time understanding that we're 3 times the size of the entire country, but it's a big place, but it's a real connected story. And so we've taken on the charge of not just South Texas, but all of Texas. Our first collection in 1926-27 came from a name that some of you will recognize because of the Trail Drivers of Texas, George Saunders. And Saunders ran the San Antonio Livestock Company, commission company, and that's the stockyards when Saunders ran it, George Washington Saunders, in the 19th century. He also gave us that photograph. He gave us all the things in his office. And if you see around the edge of those little wagons, all those branding irons, he gave us his branding iron collection. And there are some branding irons no one had ever seen, like Taylor White. It was the first Anglo organized ranch in East Texas. And at the time, Coahuila, because this was Mexico. And so we got all those branding irons, and there are probably close to 100 and a lot of important ones. You see a wagon peeking out in the corner over there. That is Captain King's mud wagon that he bought from the government when he was having so much trouble riding horses after the Civil War. Again, that's Saunders in the stockyards operation. And Saunders was always very, very hospitable to the Witte, and he did a lot for us. And he gave us a lot of important artifacts that he had in his office. And I don't mean just like 20, I mean several hundred. These brands are all from Saunders' collection that he gave us. And in the early 30s, the Witte published a little book that showed about, I guess there's about 6 or 8 pages of brands. And this is a little booklet that is very hard to find. And his brand is that 10 up there with the curve above it. That half circle 10 is his. When he was 10 years old, his dad gave him 10 cows and told him to get after it. He lived down on a ranch by Victoria, and that was his brand that he registered when he was 10 years old. That's George. And the difference between the Witte collection and a lot of collections is that the Witte collection is historically oriented. We like an important story with an important artifact. George is holding a saddle that he kept in his office. That saddle came from the Boyce brothers in Kennedy, Texas. We know it went up the trail at least 4 times and possibly more. It says on there, if you look across the bottom, Saunders put that on there, and it says this is an apple horn tree or an apple horn saddle. So we're not going off what somebody else said or what somebody thinks it should have been. This guy was a major drover. He was a millionaire before 1900. He owned the biggest stock operation in the state for a long time. And he's saying that, which gives it a little bit more credibility than someone else. This is that saddle today, that exact saddle. It was made by Stratton in Cuero, Texas, in which I'm sure Mr. Oliver's heard of many times. And it's a very important saddle. It's incredibly fragile. The stirrup leathers are just pieces of rawhide that were laced together to keep it in one piece. But the Stratton stamp is still on the back of the saddle. And it's one of our most important pieces in my mind, and a piece that did go up the Chisholm Trail. The Chisholm Trail, I would say, and I think Wayne Ludwig's the final word on it, but basically went up I-35 from San Antonio to Abilene, and the first herd that arrived when McCoy opened Abilene, Kansas, was O.W. Wheeler out of San Antonio with 2,400 cattle. And so we have a real tight connection with all this. When people ask us, what is your geographic area? We tell them somewhere south of Monterey to somewhere near Montana, because that is the range that San Antonio was involved with during the 18th and the 19th century. Cattle drives were not new to us. The first herd left San Antonio to go to Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1778 to feed our allies in the American Revolution who were Spanish. And that drive left San Antonio under the guidance of a man named Hernandez that took about 2,000 head directly over there, and that was not the only herd that left San Antonio. So we have a pretty long tradition of this. I mean, it's Spanish tradition. This is the photograph I was talking about. I believe this came from Saunders as well, crossing the river, very possibly the Rio Grande. And you see mixed cowboys, mixed groups of cowboys. You see guys in sombreros, guys in cowboy hats, and longhorns. And that's what a longhorn looked like in 1880, 1870. We have lots of artifacts that came in through those early years. People always say, well, why is this out? That's Spanish, and they weren't here that early. Well, this isn't a Espuela Grande. It's the shank in the rowel. It's the largest rowel known to exist in any collection at this time. That rowel's 11 inches across from tip to tip. Those spring coils on the back are forged pieces of iron about 10 inches long that are rolled up. And people say, yeah, well, they brought that here and lost it. Not really. That was found right there. The only natural lake in Texas, besides Sabine over there in East Texas, is a little puddle called Espantosa. That's a Spanish word that means like haunted or spooky, scary. And there was a natural lake there between San Antonio and the border, and it became a campsite and a stopover for expeditions and for parties coming north to San Antonio from real early. And that spur rowel was found at that lake. So somebody was up there early on, late 1600s, early 1700s, and lost that spur. So they were used in Texas, and they were ridden over here. And we have real rare artifacts like that. And some of those aren't. This one is. And I'll go back to it. When you come in the museum, we have a group of walls that go through time and space. And one starts in the earliest period of Earth and goes forward into the Paleolithic period of dinosaurs and so forth. The second one is prehistory and is basically what was going on in Texas through the Lower Pecos and indigenous cultures during that time. And the third wall is the historic era, which is basically Cabeza de Vaca till now. And this is on that historic wall. And these are road cuts that show what the geological strata was and where this was found. And we have artifacts that are embedded in those road cuts to show where they would have fallen and how they relate to each other. This is another artifact. We actually purchased this with a group of artifacts. It's been published twice that I know of, not by me. This is one of those artifacts like the spur rowel that tells a story. Somebody lost that spur rowel at that natural lake camping, obviously, because it was a big Spanish stopover. This gun, if you look down at the bottom edge of the handle, you'll see grooves cut into the bottom of the handle. All the shots are fired except for one, and the hammer's jammed. And that Colt single action was found in Terralingua in a dry wash in the late 50s. And if there was ever a gun that told a story by its condition and the way it is, it's this one. Our problem is at this point, we just don't know the details. We have several major firearms like this. We have a Colt Dragoon that was found in a wall, walled up in Castroville, Texas, that belonged to a very well-known Texas Ranger that served in the 1840s and 1850s. It's in pretty bad shape like this one, but his name, Haller, is actually pinged into the backstrap. And we know who found it and where they found it in Castroville. We have another piece that was brought up here. That was one of the Remington rolling block rifles that was sent to Maximilian for the Revolution. Those are the things we like. We have some pretty firearms, we have some pretty saddles, but we love things that have a strong history connected with a specific item. I'm sure you'll recognize these. They were sold as a subscription plan to mark the trail, and hell, you could probably buy one out there in Pecos. The Chisholm Trail would have gone that far when this guy was selling them. One of my questions has always been, these were cast here in San Antonio by Alamo Ironworks. And I wonder what kind of deal this guy had with Alamo Ironworks to make this happen. But it was the first real attempt, I believe, to mark this and to recognize the Chisholm Trail more as a historic event and something that happened in this state that was very important. Okay, this is where things come together. The Trail Drivers of Texas and the 1936 Centennial Hall. The Trail Drivers of Texas was founded by George Saunders and actually by one of Catherine's ancestors, George West, and they formed it to commemorate the events of moving cattle up the trail, and they saw it going away and thought, hey, this is the largest movement of domestic animals in the history of the earth and probably always will be, and it deserves some recognition. It also brought the South out of the Civil War and Texas out of the Civil War with money, and the same with Kansas. It saved Texas, and we'd be Mississippi and those other bankrupt states at the end of the Civil War if it weren't for the trail drives. And so it was a big deal. The first events were to round up everybody and get them recognized. They either asked for pictures or they were given pictures by the families. This is Amanda Burke's. That is her personal portrait, which we own, that she gave. This is D.H. Snyder on here. The Snyder family, as in Snyder, Texas. He went up the trail with some of my family, the Kendricks and the Wolfchens from Mitchell County, a number of times. And these pictures are not guys. When you go into the trail drivers galleries, you don't see people like him, because that's a picture that was taken when he was doing it. The other portraits were made long after. And if you've heard of the Snyders, it's because that is now the New Braunfels Smokehouse. So they're still selling beef and still in it today. And his namesake, Dudley Snyder, is head of New Braunfels Smokehouse. Shanghai Pierce, J.S. Cruz, who has an incredible story. And a lot of these I could talk about for 30 minutes, just getting started. Ab Blocker, and then Richard King. King, by his own claim and his family's claim, never went up the trail. He hired people like Blocker and called them the Kansas Boys, and they moved his cattle. And King was dead before the trail drive hit its height, but King Ranch was still involved. Ab Blocker's brother was probably the biggest drover in Texas and worked out of Austin. And Ab Blocker lived and worked out of Big Wells and was a major, he was the herd boss for dozens and dozens of herds. And we have Ab Blocker's spurs and we have his bridle without a bit. The bridle conchos are filed down silver dollars with a Blocker initial on them. And the spurs are, this is one of those stories, and this is why we love this artifact. The spurs are burned up and they look like spurs from California. They're drop shank spurs, and all the silver's melted out of them. And what happened was he was in a hotel in Big Wells, and between drives, and the hotel caught on fire, and he woke up with everything engulfed in flames and jumped out the window. And he survived. He went back after everything cooled off and pulled those spurs out of the fire and kept using them. So they still look like great spurs. They're just burned up and all the silver's melted out of them. But we do have those in the collections at the Witte. Cruz had a bugle that he brought back from the Maximilian era in Mexico, and we have that bugle as well. And we have the Slaughter family Bible. We have King Ranch brands and blankets that were given to us, and his personal carriage, or it wasn't a carriage, it was a mud wagon, but we have that as well, completely restored, and you'll see that. The trail drivers, this was before the Witte, 1915 to 1936. They had their events on the grounds of what is now the Witte in what was Breckenridge Park. The man on the left is a drover named Johnson. He's written up in Cattle People by J. Frank Dobie. The taller man in the black suit, that's Saunders, George W. Saunders. This is at a reunion event here in San Antonio in the 20s. The man to the outside of Saunders, I haven't been able to find it who it is, but the man to the left is a man named Irby Fox. And Irby Fox never worked cows, and he never went up the trail. He loved music. He was raised by an old man in a ranch on a ranch up by Burnett, Texas. And the man gave him money to go to college. He got a really high test music education back east. Came back and he remembered his roots, and he set songs to music and wrote a number of songs. And one of them starts out, "Come gather around, boys, and listen to my tale, and I'll tell you about my problems on the old Chisholm Trail." So he is a major player in what we consider to be cowboy music, and everybody's forgotten about him. And here he is with Saunders at one of the reunions. And I believe we wrote this up for a little journal tabloid paper called the South Texas The Newsletter, which is probably one of the most widely distributed newsletters in the world. People get it in China, and it's, subscription only. It's very hard to get, and it's so regional. And if you don't know the people it's talking about in South Texas, you won't be interested. But we did publish this picture and write about Irby Fox in that. In 1936, a strange thing happened. It was the centennial of Texas. Not really. It was the centennial of the Republic of Texas. And the governor went to the feds and talked them out of millions of dollars to build museums and commemorations to the Republic of Texas. I guess he didn't know it wasn't a state, but anyway, we got this, designed by a major San Antonio architect. And this was built in commemoration of the trail drivers, the pioneers, and the Texas Rangers. And as a result, this became the headquarters of the Old Time Trail Drivers of Texas. Saunders was gone by this time. The West brothers were all dead by this time. So it was starting to be the second generation. And the upstairs was used as a meeting room and a ballroom for parties. And the ground floor were a group of museums and offices that were used by those three organizations. In 2010, we actually started this goal in the late 1990s. But in 2010, we acquired a 100-year lease, 99-year lease from the city of San Antonio on this building, and the occupants moved out. The occupant that didn't move out and very graciously gave us their collections were the Trail Drivers of Texas, and we still On that right side, that left side room, that is our trail drivers gallery. And we still have a tribute room to those people with some artifacts that were related, some from the trail drivers and some from the Witte collections. We got things like a brand book from Atascosa County from the 1870s, early 1880s, which is a very important document as it registers brands, the ranches that held them, earlops, dewlaps, and where they were going up the trail. There's 2 of those brand books, and that's something that's in our collection, and that is out. We got the personal photo album of several of the drovers that show their pictures, and all of them have their names underneath them. And so that one's, it was a great thing for us. And in 2010, it became the Robert J. and Helen C. Clayburgh South Texas Heritage Center at the Witte Museum, and we opened. We also spent a lot of money, and we raised more than it took to do this. So we had money to continue with the exhibits and built this addition. Now that building that we took over is a state archaeological landmark. So they weren't very happy with us adding on to it, and everything had to go through the state Texas Historical Commission. And if you look down here in front, right here, if you can see it, that is Gutzon Borglum's Trail Drivers Monument that you saw in the first slide with all those brands. That monument was originally done for the city of San Antonio. It was a competition to go on Alamo Plaza. It was to be monumental or heroic scale. It was going to be larger than life. In other words, the horses, the riders, everything. And Gutzon Borglum, if you don't know, he did Mount Rushmore. And so this was before he did any of that. And his studio was in Breckenridge Park, which is still there and is completely restored. And when he did this, he thought he had a pretty good shot at it. And he lost. He lost the competition, and he lost it to Pompeo Capini, who did the much argued about cenotaph on Alamo Plaza today. He did the maquette for this. The trail drivers, who a lot of them by this time were multimillionaires, they paid to have it cast in bronze and put it on the Witte grounds. And so we now have that there are panels that go on the base that are on it too. And it's one of our prize pieces. And the Borglum went on to the Dakotas to do Mount Rushmore, but his daughter married a rancher and stayed down there by George West. And I believe she's still alive and down there in her 90s. This is the second floor of the Clayburgh South Texas Heritage Center. And we took pieces from an exhibit I did in 1993, 94 that traveled all over the United States called Thundering Hooves. And we repurposed them and combined them with all new artifacts and created our galleries that are upstairs, and they're open today. That Longhorn, he is a big one, but he is a direct descent Longhorn of the ones from the trails. He's one of the ones that one of the ranchers kept alive clear up, and the family still maintains the bloodlines. Those are the Longhorns that are at up by Albany at the fort there, and they're also at the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge. That's a Comanche warrior. Everything that this man has on him was especially made from actual artifacts and was made in the way it would have been made. Like the leggings he's wearing are deerskin dyed with buffalo gall, and they're stitched with sinews. So we went all out when we did that project, and we felt it was a shame to do it any other way. The house in the back has stories, including Amanda Burke's story. You can walk up to that doorway, and there are artifacts inside of what a ranch house would have been like. Plus there's these video presentations. To the left are stories about brands. A lot of the brands we have, like the Broken Heart brand, have very specific stories from the people who registered them. And we were able to track those stories down and actually, in that case, an 1860s newspaper. So that's the main part of the outdoor section of the South Texas Heritage Center, ranching. We also do a lot of coverage of Spanish history and Mexican history, and this is a Spanish Mexican horse, well, Spanish horseman, 1870s, I mean 1770s, with cruciform stirrups. They rode this way from the late 1600s up through the late 1700s. This is a long shot of the gallery. There's a Texas cowboy over there in the center. That is King Ranch's, that is Richard King's mud wagon, restored there on the right. And on the left is Helen C. Clayburgh. And the reason we put her in there, interestingly enough, the family wasn't big on the idea, so it had nothing to do with them doing personal advertising. She's in there because she comes down here from Kansas, marries this Texas cowboy on a ranch, and she's used to riding a different style. She rides hunter jumper horses and saddlebred horses, and she's used to riding English. And she gets down on the ranch and starts working cattle and following her husband on horseback, and she combines the style. She comes up with her own look, and it became very iconic in South Texas. She often rode Mexican style saddles. She always wore English boots and field boots. She wore English clothes, a cowboy hat that was custom made, and we copied that hat directly from her personal hat, which is in the collections at Kingsville at the King Ranch. This is a painting that we got when we acquired the Trail Drivers of Texas. This is the old Chisholm Trail, and it's about 6 by 8 feet. So it's an important painting, and that is in the Trail Drivers Gallery. Things begin to change again. Catherine Nelson Hall, who is Texas Heritage Curator because she's great at doing this kind of research, and she's also, we met on Antiques Roadshow working for public television. We're married now, and this is her direct descendant. This is Ike West, and they worked out of Lavaca County, ran big ranches, and down towards Jackson County they had between 50 and 80,000 acres. If you don't think that kid on the left is a dyed-in-the-wool cowboy, he was raised doing this. He was the only one born in Texas in the family. The rest were born in Tennessee, and he grew up doing this. And this is a tintype of him taken just after the Civil War. Now, when his brothers got older in the late 1860s and were starting to run cattle up the trail with a number of partners, that's a picture he had made to send back to his wife, and he had it made in Fort Worth. So he swung off the trail, got his picture made, sent it back to his wife, and on it goes. What I like about this is it shows two different times in this guy's life. You know, handsome guy, all he wanted to be was a cowboy, and that's basically all he was, clear up until the time he died. He was very influential in ranching and in winter feeding, crop raising to feed the cattle. He did a lot of things in the business that haven't been acknowledged. And this collection, thanks to Catherine's efforts and her family, are now in the hands of the Witte Museum, and it's extensive. We also published a book, which I couldn't have done without her. That's the Wests of Texas, and that longhorn on the cover, that picture was taken about 1917, and George West kept a herd of longhorns on his ranch down near the town of George West, the village. And this was at another Chisholm Trail meeting, Bandera, seems like 100 years ago, but it wasn't quite that long ago. And Catherine did piles of research on this. I could not have written this book without her support, and plus her going back to her family and finding these things was great for both of us. And she hadn't lived in Texas since she was a child, and she came back so we could be together. And this was the result. And the book was her motivation. She said, I've been trying to find out about my ancestors. Do you know anything about the West brothers? So I kind of said, yeah, but there's not much about them. The more we found out, and finally with Dolph Briscoe walking in, he made the comment one day, they were some of the biggest in the entire industry. And I said, like, compared to what? And he said, like, compared to Richard King, who they ended up marrying into that family. He said, you know, these guys were some of the biggest drovers in the business. They were the Kansas boys, like I said, that took cattle north for Richard King. There's Catherine. She has also published her own works. This is when she was doing a reading about the military in San Antonio in a giant high-rise downtown. And you were asking about Western movies. Well, this is how I grew up in Lubbock and Midland, with Peter Hurd paintings on the wall and ready to go shoot somebody and sing a song while I did it. And that's who really taught me about this business. When I had to get my horse, rodeo Spuds, saddle him up. First, I had to haul him to the ranch at 5 in the morning and then work cattle all day. I learned a lot that's more than writing and talking about it, as I'm sure some of you know only too well. It's a business, and it requires certain things to do it. And a great cow horse is one of them, and that's what Spudsy was. And he is over 30, retired, unlike me. In the last picture I saw, he was laying in a stock pond in 100-degree weather, just having a great time. So he's still around too. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you, Bruce. Absolutely fascinating. I cannot wait for normal times for us to get down and see the museum. Thanks for an outstanding presentation. We're going to check the chat, see if anybody has any questions. There's one suspicious comment in the chat here. It comes from a lady named Catherine, who says that among her favorite TV cowboy stars is Bruce Shackelford. So, your wife is still on your side, Bruce. I want you to know.
Well, the other side of that is if we had done Antiques Roadshow last year, I've been on it since the first season, which is 25 years. Wow. We shoot it as a documentary show. We're really not concerned about the money. And the reason I'm still on that show is because I know about the stories in the history of this material. Interestingly enough, Catherine is on that show also as a staff photographer and working behind the scenes to document what happens. So she knows everything that goes on the show too.
Bruce, there is a question. You touched on the vaqueros. Jean Chavez asks, what exhibits at the Witte Museum feature the vaquero?
Well, we have permanent things that show the transition from Hispanic culture in Texas in the cattle business to the and I can't say it was really Anglo dominated. I'm not sure it was, but it was to the Anglo styles that we know of today. And we have a case full of material. And when I say case, that case is about 20 feet long and 8 feet tall and 4 feet deep, and full of saddles that go all the way from Hispanic style saddles in the 1850s up to trail saddles and Mother Hubbards. We have spurs of all kinds. We have things, Saunders gave us things that he was familiar with when he was working cattle, and we have some of those things out. Right now we have a photography exhibit. They're photographs by Janelle Clayberg, who is married to Tio and lives at King Ranch. And Janelle photographed roundups every year for, 50 years. And I was talking with photographer David Steckline, who's now deceased, and I wanted to have a show of David's work. And he said, no, you need to show Janelle. he said, hers are the real thing, and they tell that story. And of course, you know, most of the cowboys on King Ranch are Queneños, and so King's men that came from Mexico in the 1850s. So that's also a part of that, and that exhibit is up right now and will be up for about 3 months.
Very good. Michael Brower asked, you showed a slide of a cast iron Chisholm Trail marker from the Witte collection. Is there a marker for another historic cattle trail near the Witte? And if so, what is that marker supposed to mark?
What that marker is the Western Trail. And it does mark it, but the Western Trail story is a whole another story.
Well, that was a loaded question, obviously, coming.
Yeah, obviously.
What about the upcoming Black Cowboys exhibit and another renovation plan for the South Texas Heritage Center?
Well, we are planning on renovating the South Texas Heritage Center. The great thing now, and I have to say about computers, because I can find things that it would have taken decades to find even 10 or 15 years ago. So we're coming up with new information all the time, and we're going to redo the South Texas Heritage Center to a degree and talk about a lot of the things that we've come up with. Starting, I guess, about next October, we're opening an exhibit on Black Cowboys. I was one of the writers on a Texas A&M book called Black Cowboys of Texas. Very few people know the new estimates that are being done by scholars running the census indexes and the manufacturing rolls, which include ranching, show that probably closer to 30% of the cowboys that went up the trail, and maybe more from that Lavaca County area and the coastal bend, were African-American cowboys. And so, you know, it's something that I started working on about 2000 when we published the book with A&M. And it's, so we're going to do an exhibit that covers a lot of that, and are, you know, looking forward. We're working on it right now.
Outstanding. Bruce, thank you for a fascinating presentation. We can't wait to see the Witte Museum in person and as normal times come about. So a huge thank you from the International Chisholm Trail Association and our guests. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for what you're doing, because this is what keeps it alive.
Well, we sure appreciate that. And to all our guests, let me see if I can share a screen here quickly. Just a couple of slides to finish up here. We invite you to join us on the second Friday of each month at 10 a.m. And so for next month, that would be Friday, March 12. So join us then at 10 a.m. Our speaker for next month is Jill Keeney, who's on with us today. She's CEO of the Can-Oakland Networks in Caldwell, Kansas. She'll be giving us a preview of the 2021 Chisholm Trail Fest and Caldwell's 150th anniversary celebration, which will happen later this spring. The community of Caldwell, Kansas, also known as the Border Queen, is planning a whole passel of activities around these celebrations, so you won't want to miss next month's presentation. We invite you to join ICTA. Here's a little bit of information about how to do that, and we'd love to have you join us. So to close our program today, this is Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate, saying thanks for taking time to join us in this place, and come on back next month for our next Cattle Trails Showcase. Happy trails, everybody.